right, so we are doing lesson 5A.2 rotations. So your notes should be number 77. If you'll go ahead and make sure those are out and put a 77 in the corner of your binder. The corner of your notes for your binder. All right, at the very top of your notes, you'll see that it says a rotation is a transformation in which a figure is turned around a point. So that's what goes in the blank at the very top of your notes, turned around a point. All right, so we are going to be turning in this transformation, and the point that we're going to be using in all of our transformations or all of our rotations is simply 0, 0. We're going to use the origin 0, 0 and rotate around it. Now, when you go to geometry later on 10th grade, you'll probably do rotations around other points, and those get a little bit more complicated. This one is kind of like the universal one of just going around the origin. And we have specific rules that we can use for it, kind of like what we did with our rules for reflection yesterday, okay? A couple of things that we need to make sure we understand before we can talk about rotation is first is the direction of rotations. When you rotate, there are two directions that you can go. Now you can either rotate clockwise, which is the way that a clock hand moves. So that is always moving to the right, down, and around. And then the opposite would be counterclockwise, which is the opposite of clockwise. Counter that, okay? So those are the two directions. So when you rotate, it can say rotate clockwise or counterclockwise, and you need to know which direction those are, okay? The next is the degree of rotation. So I'm gonna start by going through and talking about the quadrants first. So what was the shortcut we learned last Friday for remembering the order of the quadrants? We draw what letter? A C. So when we draw that letter C, we start in quadrant what? 1, and then we go to quadrant 2, 3, and then 4. What's the Roman numeral for 4?
N.
The IV. It's the I and then the V. All right, so we need to know those Roman numerals. Okay. So next is to talk about the degrees of rotation. There's only 3 degrees of rotation that we're going to be using. And that first one is a 90-degree rotation. A 90-degree rotation. So think about 90 degrees. You know a lot of 90 degrees, probably a 90-degree angle. Okay? But if the hands on the clock are pointing at 12, 90-degree rotation, which way or what number clockwise would the hands be pointing at then?
3.
The 3. That would make a 90-degree turn, okay? It's also known as a quarter turn. A quarter turn. So that's the first one that we're going to need to know. So if you're at 12 and you rotate 90 degrees, you're pointing at the 3 clockwise. If you go counterclockwise, you're pointing at the 9, okay? All right, let's do that in terms of quadrants. If we start in quadrant 1 and we rotate 90 degrees clockwise, then we end up in quadrant 4. 90 degrees from quadrant 1 would be down to quadrant 4. All right, what if we start in quadrant 4 and we rotate 90 degrees clockwise? Then we end up in quadrant 3. If we start in quadrant 3 and we rotate 90 degrees clockwise, we're now in quadrant 2. And if we start in quadrant 2 and we go 90 degrees clockwise, we're in quadrant 1, all right? Counterclockwise would be the opposite. So if you're in quadrant 1 and you go 90 degrees counter, you're now in quadrant 2. From 2 to 3 would be another 90, and 3 to 4 would be 90, and so forth. All right, the next degree of rotation that we need to know is a 180-degree rotation. That's known as a half turn. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard 180 in snowboarding, skateboarding, and those types of sports. Yeah, when you do a 180, you're just turning around. So if the clock's pointing at 12, a 180 clockwise would be pointing at the 6. And if you go counterclockwise, it's also pointing at the 6. So a 180, whether you turn clockwise or if you turn counterclockwise, is still a half turn. So it's going to be the same rule. Okay? So let's talk about where you would locate. If we start in quadrant 1 and we do a 180, your figure should end up in which quadrant? 3, all the way over here. All right, it doesn't matter if you go counterclockwise or clockwise, you'll end up from quadrant 1 to quadrant 3. That is a 180. All right, let's do, what if you start in quadrant 2 and do a 180? You'll start in quadrant 2 and end up in quadrant 4. All right, let's do, what if you start in quadrant 3 and you do a 180? Then you're in quadrant 1, all the way over here. And the last one, if you start in quadrant 4 and do a 180, you'll end up in quadrant 2. Okay? All right, and then one more degree of turn. Anyone want to guess what it is?
360.
Nope.
270.
270. I heard y'all doing the math. What were you adding? 90 to 180, right? That's a 270. And that's a 3/4 turn. That's a 3/4 turn. All right, so a 270. If we start in quadrant 1 and we do a 3/4 turn clockwise, this would be 90, this would be 180, and this would be 270. So if you start in quadrant 1 and do a clockwise 270, you end up in quadrant 2. If we start in quadrant 1 and we do a counter 270, it would be 90, 180, 270 here. You'd end up in quadrant 4. Okay? So those are the 3 we need to do. Now I didn't talk about a 360, but I heard you say it. What is a 360?
Full
It's
spin.
when you turn all the way around. If we start in quadrant 1 and do a 360, where do we wind up? Back where you were. The points wouldn't change. And it doesn't matter which direction on the 360, you would end up exactly back where you are. So there's not a rule for 360 because it just puts you back where you started. Okay? So these are the 3 that we need to know for this lesson. Okay, so then the next thing is to look at the actual rules, and then I'm going to go through them with you, and then I'm going to show you the shortcut that you can use to help you find the rule. Because otherwise we've got to memorize them, and that's not really helpful because once the unit's over, usually you just forget them. So instead I'm going to show you a shortcut, right? So first thing I want to go through is talking about which is alike. Notice this says rotation of 90 degrees clockwise. If we rotate 90 degrees clockwise, that's the same as rotating 270 degrees counterclockwise. Notice that these 2 rules are the same because if you go 90 degrees clockwise, you end up pointing at the 3. If you go 270 degrees clockwise, you're still pointing at the 3. Okay? So these 2 rules are the same. That's why there's only one rule, as long as you understand those are the same. The other one that would be the same is 270 clockwise, 270 degrees clockwise. So we would go all the way over pointing at the 9, which would be the same as going 90 counter, okay? And that one is here. So these 2 are the same, the red ones. And then your 180 we talked about is the same no matter which way you go, counter or clockwise. All right? Now, one thing I want you to see about this rule, look at the X and the Y. What happened to the X and the Y's? They switched positions. And that's probably one of the toughest things to remember is that the X and Y's and the original are now going to switch, and the Y value will go first and the X value will go second. And then one of them, depending on how many turns, will become its opposite sign. Remember when we did our shortcut yesterday for reflections? The negative doesn't mean that it becomes negative, it just means that it changes to its opposite sign. Okay? So for a 90 clockwise, the X and Y switch and the X changes to its opposite. And then for a 270 clockwise, the X and Y switch, but the Y becomes its opposite. And then my favorite rule is the 180. They don't switch, the X and Y stay this way, but they both change to their opposite. And that's the 3 rules that we really need to know. Now I'm going to show you a shortcut on how to find those. And today you got a heart. If you're doing this at home, you don't have to make a heart. You can just take index card and cut it in half. put an X on one side and a Y. And then on the back of the X, you're gonna write negative X. And on the back of the Y, you're gonna write negative Y. Okay, so it makes an ordered pair on the front, X, Y. And on the back, you've got your negative X and negative Y. And you can use this to help you with the rules. All right, so we're gonna always start at the very beginning with our X and Y, like a normal ordered pair. And when we move clockwise, we're gonna be moving to the right or flipping our cards to the right. We just made it a heart because it's Valentine's and we always do this in February. And if we go counterclockwise, we're gonna be flipping to the left. So right means clockwise, left means counterclockwise, just like a clock moves. All right, so if we wanna do a 90-degree rotation, get with me. I want this flat on your desk. I'm holding it up so I can demonstrate, but you do this flat on your desk, it's way easier. For a 90-degree rotation, you're gonna pick up the X and you're gonna flip it over to represent one turn, 90 degrees. And now the ordered pair is Y opposite X. And that's the rule for 90 degrees clockwise. All right, go back to XY. To do a 180 clockwise, how many flips would that be? Two. So we're gonna flip it once. There's our 90 rule. And then you're gonna pick up this one on the inside again and flip it. And there is our 180 rule. Opposite X, opposite Y. All right, if we go all the way back to the beginning, XY, and we wanna do 270 degree, we're gonna flip how many times? 3. So we're gonna flip once, that's our 90. We're gonna flip again, that's our 180. And flip a third time, there's our 270 clockwise, opposite Y, X. So each time you're picking up the one that's on the inside and flipping it over. And if I flip it one more time, that makes a what? A 360, and look where it's back to. Where it started, a 360. Now let's try counterclockwise. If we go counterclockwise, we'll no longer be picking up the one on the left to flip it over. We're gonna be picking up the one on the right and flipping it over. So for 90 degrees counterclockwise, the rule is opposite Y, X. If you flip it one more time, there's your 180 rule, opposite X, opposite Y. And if you flip it again, you now have your 270 counter, opposite X, Y, and flip one more time, and we're back to the beginning, 360. All right, and I'm gonna turn around and model this one more time on the board. See if I can find a place to do this. So here is our XY. To do 90 degrees, we would pick this one up and flip it over clockwise. To do 180, we'd pick up and flip again. There's our 180. To do 270, we would flip again. And there is our 270 clockwise. And to do 360, you would flip one more time and you're back to XY. All right? Same thing for going counterclockwise, except for you would flip to the left. So you're always picking up and flipping it over the other one. Okay? All right, so now let's do some examples. Rotate each point 90 degrees clockwise. So let's start with finding our rule. We start with XY. We flip one time to the right for clockwise. And there's our rule, Y opposite X. So let's start there by writing the rule. Y opposite X. So that means Y is gonna move to the front position and the X value will come second and change the sign. So the point 5, -3. We're gonna put the little symbol, the apostrophe for prime. The Y value will come first, so -3 is gonna move first. And the x value 5 is gonna move second and become its opposite, so that becomes negative 5. So the new location after a 90-degree clockwise turn of the point 5, negative 3 would be negative 3, negative 5. Number 2, we're gonna do the same thing again. We're gonna take that y value and move it first. So 8 moves into the first position. And the value 2 is gonna turn to its opposite, negative 2, and come second. So the new location after a 90-degree clockwise turn from 2, 8 would be 8, negative 2. Notice it went from quadrant 1 to 8, negative 2. What quadrant would that be? 4. All right, number 3, we're gonna move the y value first, so this becomes 4, and then 7 will go second and become positive, because it was negative, it changes signs. So the new location of negative 7, 4 would be 4, 7. All right, the next example wants us to do a 180, and it says counterclockwise, but we know that 180 doesn't matter which way you go, you end up the same spot, but we can do that. 180 is your XY, if you flip it twice, will be opposite X, opposite Y. That's our 180 rule. Opposite X, opposite Y. They don't switch positions for 180, but they both change signs. So positive 5 will become a negative 5, and negative 3 will become a positive 3. So the new location of 5, negative 3 is negative 5, 3. 2, 8, those are both positive, so they're gonna both change signs, become negative 2, negative 8. And the last one, negative 7, 4, will become 7, negative 4. Both just change signs. The final problem down here says 270 counter. So 270's counter, if we start at XY, we're flipping left 3 times. That's our y opposite x, which is the same as our 90 clockwise rule. And we've already done our 90 clockwise rule. So this comes first, negative 3, comma, negative 5, because the x value changes to its opposite. 8 will come first, 8, negative 2, the 2 changed to negative. And then the last one again, the 4 comes first, and the 7 becomes positive. So it's the same answers that we got up here, because 270 counter is the same as 90 clockwise. Okay. All right, let's look at an example in the coordinate plane. So this should be example 4 on your paper. Rotate the following 180. So we're going to use our 180 rule, which is opposite x, opposite y. Go ahead and write your rule on your table. And the next thing we're going to do is use that to rotate this triangle FNW. So we're going to start by finding F prime. Make sure you're doing your parentheses and separating your values with a comma. So they're both just changing signs. So negative 2 and negative 3 is going to become what? A positive 2 and a positive 3. 2, 3. All right. Negative 3, negative 2 is for point N, so N prime. Will be what? Thank you. 3, positive 2. And W prime?
3, positive
3, 3. Good. So now we want to graph it. And the first thing I like to do to help me with graphing is to draw my little 0, 0 point, because that's where we're always going to start when we go to graph points. And then I want to think about what's happening. My figure starts out over here. What quadrant did we say this is?
3.
Quadrant 3. And we're going to do a 180, so it's going to end up in quadrant 1. It should end up here in quadrant 1. All right, so that's the first thing I'm going to check. All right, now I'm going to start by graphing each point. 2, 3. We start at 0, 0, 2. Positive 2 means go right 2. Positive 3 means up 3. There's my point. I'm going to label it F prime. The next point is 3, 2. Start at 0, 0, go right 3 and up 2. There's my new point, N prime. And the last one is 3, 3. So we start at 0, 0. We're going to go right 3 and up 3. And there is W prime. And we have our new triangle that has been rotated 180 degrees. Now notice that it's turned. So if I fold, will these match up?
Yes.
The points will not. No, look, W's up here and W prime's up and W was down here. So it's not like a reflection, okay? They're not gonna match up, but it is turned. All right, let's do another one. Example number 5. This time we have another triangle, but it's wanting us to do 90 counterclockwise. So we first need our rule. So start back with our XY. We're gonna do 90 counterclockwise, so that's one flip. Which direction?
Left.
To the left. So there we go. And there's our rule, opposite Y, X. Let's write our rule. Opposite Y, X. So they're switching places and the Y becomes its opposite sign. All right, so I'm gonna get my paper set up for F prime, L prime, and V prime. Set my parentheses up. And we're gonna be switching them and changing the Y value sign. All right, so 5 and 2 we're gonna switch and the Y value 2 is gonna become -2. So -2, 5. Three, 1 is gonna switch and the Y value 1 will become -1, 3. Go ahead and do the last one by yourself. V prime, what'd you get, guys? -3, 3. And now we're ready to graph. So we're starting out up here. What quadrant does this figure begin in? Quadrant 1. We're gonna do a 90 counter. So we're going which direction? To the left 90. So we're gonna end up in quadrant 2. Good. All right, let's graph our points. Find your 0, 0. That's where we always start. The first number tells us to go left or right. The second number tells us to go up or down. -2 means left 2. +5 means up 5. So it ends up way up here, point F prime. Point L prime is left 1 and up 3. And V prime is left 3, up 3. We connect and look at our triangle rotated 90 degrees counterclockwise. All right, let's do another one. I think the next one is 90 clockwise. 90 clockwise. So we're on the back of the first page now. Everyone should have the first 2 examples filled in with the new coordinates and the graphs. All right, we're gonna start by finding our 90-degree clockwise rule. So everyone practice with the cards. You've gotta practice using these so you remember how to use them, okay? Or otherwise, they're not gonna be helpful. So we're always starting with a regular ordered pair XY, and we're going 90 degrees clockwise, so we're gonna flip one time to the right for clockwise. So we flip that over and there's our rule. What is it? Y opposite X. Y opposite X. So whatever, this doesn't mean that this becomes negative. This means that whatever the sign is, it's gonna change to the opposite. All right, so here's our ordered pairs. They're all positive, which means they're in quadrant what? Quadrant 1. So when we go clockwise, the second one's gonna become negative. So where quadrant will it end up with a positive and then a negative?
3. No, 4.
Quadrant what?
4.
4. We're not done, we got 3 minutes. No, we don't, we are finished. All right, so here's what you're gonna do for practice. finish up maybe 2 or 3 more examples on here and practice with your cards. I also gave you the rotations practice sheet. You don't have to go through and do every single problem, but pick a couple to make sure you got it. Cards, I want them together and in a pocket or a clear pouch so that you have them every day for the rest of this unit, okay? All right, great job.